President Biden has repeatedly expressed that if China uses force against Taiwan, the U.S. will militarily intervene. How do you view this as a consensus in U.S. politics?
Yeah, so I guess the statements by President Biden, I think he was probably more ambiguous in that he talked about coming to Taiwan's defense. Now, he said it 4 times, and on each occasion the White House walked it back, which makes no sense to me. But let me say this much. I think given the state of affairs in the Taiwan Strait, I think with the increasing actions and belligerence by Beijing, driven by Xi Jinping, I've called for more strategic clarity in the U.S. position rather than ambiguity, because my view is I think Beijing needs to clearly know where the United States would fall on this issue if China, unprovoked, attacks Taiwan. And so I've applauded President Biden for this statement. I think it makes sense.
部长他其实态度非常清楚，就是他要战略清晰。可是战略清晰跟战略模糊之间呢，其实在美国感觉上，他们其实有非常多不一样的声音。那部长，我们了解他是一个对中比较是鹰派的哈。我想请问的是，那有一些反对的声音，究竟要如何抗衡？
Well, I think the position with regard to strategic ambiguity or clarity in this case is going to be determined by the occupant of the White House. And in this matter, President Biden has spoken out clearly as far as I'm concerned, and I think his instincts are right on that matter. My view has been that when you're dealing with autocrats, whether they reside in Moscow or Beijing, you have to be very clear about the lines you'll draw, the stances you'll take, the resolve that you will show. And in some ways, I don't think we deterred enough Vladimir Putin and didn't cite clearly enough our opposition to what he was proposing to do 18 months ago as Russian forces were poised across the Ukrainian border. And so I think with more clarity and more resolve, we might have been able to prevent that from happening. That's why I think it's more important, if not more urgent now, that we speak with one voice and clearly about opposition to Chinese belligerence against Taiwan. And look, I know that the Chinese raise this issue all the time, but if you go all the way back to 1972, you look through all the communiques, the Taiwan Relations Act, it says a couple things very clearly. One is we expect that differences between on the matter of Taiwan to be resolved peacefully. China committed to doing so. They committed to a peaceful resolution of these matters, and the United States also expressed, certainly through the Taiwan Relations Act, that we would consider any use of force to resolve this matter of grave concern. So in many ways, the United States' position has not changed, but the Chinese position has changed over the years, and I would argue has accelerated in terms of its behavior here the last 7, 8, I guess 10 years now since Xi Jinping came to power.
我再追问一个问题哦，因为部长你刚刚提到的是说，要战略清晰，要让对手比较清晰的知道说态度是什么。但是因为在俄乌战争当中，我们看到乌克兰其实当时拜登总统他在讲说美国不会出兵，那是不是也导致说俄罗斯有某种程度他认为反正你不会出兵，所以他们有了这样子就进一步做入侵的行为？
Look, I think overall the Biden administration has done a good job with regard to support for Ukraine. I think they brought the allies together. They've kept NATO unified, but they've been slow in weapons deliveries. They've been slow in providing arms and material. By the way, they've been slow in the Asia Pacific as well with regard to Taiwan, and we can talk about that if you want. But take that model as you proposed and overlay it on this situation. Again, I think the strategic clarity needs to be consistent with the Taiwan Relations Act, that we will continue to provide arms sales, services, those things. And as the Taiwan Relations Act said, that any attempt to change the status quo by force, to include coercion or embargo, would be considered a grave concern, which is diplomatic speak for U.S. forces. We would consider the military option. So I think putting more clarity into that, extending that now because of China's behavior, actually deters Beijing from making such a move. Now, I also said last year when I was in Taiwan, I've exchanged, shared these views with President Tsai, with members of her cabinet. I think there are a lot of things Taiwan needs to do as well. I think the decision to expand conscription from 4 months to 1 year was a great decision, a tough decision, but the right decision. But I also think you need to expand the defense budget. We need to really emphasize, vastly improve training for active duty forces, for the reserve, for the territorial elements, the stockpiling of supplies and energy and whatnot. Things like that, adopting an asymmetric approach to defending Taiwan and then procuring the arms and material to do that are all important things that need to happen. Because I think Xi Jinping looking across the Taiwan Strait, seeing 23 million Taiwanese who are willing to fight and die for their democracy, for their sovereignty, sends the strongest signal of all to Beijing. And importantly, sends a strong signal to the United States and its allies that Taiwan is going to fight. And if Taiwan fights, I think we will fight, just like we see in Ukraine. And I think those are all important messages to send to not just Beijing, but also to other democracies around the world. I'm pleased to see that moving along, but I think we all, Taiwan, the United States, and others, need to have a greater sense of urgency based on what Xi Jinping keeps saying about 2027.
我们现在其实比较担心，尤其是在台海之间，大家担心的是军事方面的威胁。尤其我们看到他们在军事能力方面的提升，比方像是什么？我们知道说，习近平希望在中国2049这个年份是怎么出来的？主要是因为中国建国100周年，他们希望说解放军的整个军力要提升，提升到什么程度？要世界一流，也就是说要跟美国来做匹敌。所以呢，其实部长您曾经提过一个计划是2045的战略计划，包括未来的海军战力的结构，要确保就是美国海军未来几十年还能够处于一个领先的地位。所以我想请教的是可不可以跟我们说明一下你的2045的战略计划是一个什么样的构想？
Sure. Look, I think you've laid out some important timelines. Xi Jinping did say that by 2035 they wanted to have a modern military, and by 2049, the 100th anniversary of the PRC, they wanted to overtake the United States with regard to capability. And many of us believe, and I think it's been said, that they want to dominate the Indo-Pacific by then, push us out. And we've seen comments like that from their defense minister and others. So my aim was to make sure that we could build a Navy, but also reform our entire military to make sure we were more capable before those timelines. And so the Navy of 2045 that I proposed in the fall of 2020 said that we need to have a larger fleet, over 500 vessels, manned and unmanned. But in terms of manned surface vessels, more distributed, smaller, with greater lethality. We needed more submarines because submarines are the one capability that clearly dominates around the world, would have incredible capabilities here as well. And then we needed to do a number of other things. But look, it's the fight, if you will, here in this region. It's not just a naval fight. It's Air Force, it's Army, it's Space Force, it's cyber. All those things we need to enhance and improve. You know, we talk about China having the largest military in the world. That's true. But they also have space and cyber capabilities. And I argued as Secretary of Defense that the first shots of any war with Taiwan or against Taiwan would begin in space and cyberspace, or with the United States for that matter. In fact, yesterday we spent some time with INSDR here in Taipei and had a long discussion about this. And I think the views as well as people there is that any Chinese attack would begin with some type of capabilities to use cyber against us, against Taiwan, and to blind our satellites. So we need to improve in all those domains of warfare. And again, while I think we have the greatest military in the world and the best Navy, we need to keep improving. We need to keep modernizing. We need to keep adopting advanced technologies such as AI and directed energy and all those things. And we need to share them as much as we can with Taiwan and other allies and partners as well.
The U.S. has introduced over 30 Taiwan-related bills in the first half of this year. What is your observation?
That's all. I thought there were more than that introduced. Look, I think it shows great bipartisan support on Capitol Hill for Taiwan. When I worked on Capitol Hill in the early 2000s, late 1990s, and I write about this in my book, my memoir, which I think is out in Taiwan now, I describe it a time where Taiwan had a very robust presence in Washington, D.C., but over time I saw the Chinese had kind of developed their own, and there was a period in time there where many folks bought into the Chinese liberalization theory that has now been disproven. And we saw a change in behavior, if you will. And so now, fast forward 20-some years on Capitol Hill, as I said earlier, if there's one thing that unifies Republicans and Democrats, it's opposition to China and support for Taiwan, which I think is very important. It sends all the right messages. that this issue unifies people more than it does Ukraine, in fact. So I think it's important that we show this support to Taiwan in opposition to China.
因为我们的国务卿布林肯他其实曾经有提到过一个事情，是说2027年可能会有这个攻台的时间表。那当然也会造成台湾人心里面会蛮担心的。但是有一个部分是想要请教说，我们知道说，因为感觉上时间越来越逼近的时候，然后又看到美国方面总统有一个拨款权，就是可以无偿的提供军援的这一个部分，你觉得这一个构想的来源是什么？
So I think with regard to the remarks about China and 2027, I've seen a different iteration of that and something that is actually more alarming. It was Xi Jinping told the PLA, People's Liberation Army, be prepared by 2027. So this is coming from the General Secretary of the Communist Party saying, be ready by 2027. And why is that? We can only speculate. We do know that his term is up. His third term is up in 2028. We do know that he wants to leave his mark on Chinese history, that he wants to be in the pantheon of other great PRC leaders like Mao. And he's saying that the key to national rejuvenation is the restoration of the Chinese empire, which includes Taiwan. And so one can only conclude that as he reaches his third term and as he's a 70-year-old man, that maybe that he sees Taiwan slipping away and he may try to grab Taiwan before his third term is up, or maybe as a prelude to his fourth term. And we could talk about what all that means now given the state of the Chinese economy and where that's heading. But needless to say, I think that has caught everybody's attention in Washington, certainly in the military. I spent a day at Indo-PACOM before I arrived here, speaking to the commanders there, and we're all focused on that date, if not sooner, right? Because we never know when China's going to do something. It's Xi Jinping's call. And so I think the important thing is to prepare for that moment to happen at any time. So, look, I'm glad to see that from Washington's perspective, the president got authority from Congress to do what was called a presidential drawdown authority. The first tranche was made a couple weeks ago, I think $345 million. That's very important. That's another means to get arms and ammunition and material to Taiwan. But there's also $20 billion or so in foreign sales that are held up. And I've argued back in Washington that we should reprioritize the arms deliveries and accelerate them. They don't need to go to some of the other countries, either in Europe or the Middle East. They should be prioritized here because I think it would have a far greater deterrent value. And then, of course, the view from the American side is we need to enhance our training, and Taiwan needs to enhance its in training as well to improve the skills and and all that with regard to the Taiwanese military, especially the Army. And so I think doing all those things really help improve the deterrent capability of Taiwan and cause Xi Jinping to think twice about making a move in the year 2027.